So we've got a bunch of new stuff in regards to the Montreal Canadiens, courtesy of Elliotte Friedman, as well as Eric Engels. We've got the latest on where Montreal could be going. We've got some other names that Montreal could potentially be interested in. And we also have an update on Kirby Dach. Because if you hadn't seen it, earlier in the weekend, Kirby Dach was one of the many players that filed for salary arbitration with their NHL clubs. Interestingly enough, Arbor did not file for arbitration. You can say what you want about that. But Kirby Dach is 25 years old, 6'4", 216, a right-handed center, whose contract expired in the most recently completed season. Third overall pick by Chicago back in 2019, we all recognize that for some odd reason, 2010's third overall picks have been in and out of the Montreal Canadiens organization like clockwork. From Drouin to Kotkaniemi to Dach, it's been all over the place here. And if you scroll down, you take a look, Kirby Dach had 15 points in 37 games played this most recent season. Not great. He has had better seasons in the past. He has never been fully healthy for all 82 games in one NHL campaign. However, in the playoffs, he did have 5 points in 19 games. Sure, ignore the fact that he went pointless for most of the Buffalo series and all of the Carolina series. He did have a number of good games against Tampa Bay, following up the terrible overtime loss against them in Game 2. But with that said, we have more context as to why everything went down the way it did with Dach. Let's go out there and read this tweet from Eric Engels. A little more on the filing from Dach. He was given a two-way qualifying offer by the Montreal Canadiens because he played less than 60 games this most previous season, and less than 180 games over the last three combined. Generally, an NHLer gets a one-way qualifying offer. Now, this is interesting. Dach would have preferred, it seems, to have gotten a one-way qualifying offer, but because he was given a two-way, it seems like that is the reason behind the arbitration itself. Saw Marco D'Amico and Nick Kluche both speculating this was the case. They were correct. This is indeed the case. Everyone was mad at Dach for going to arbitration, but that is pretty insulting for him to only receive a two-way qualifying offer. He's a borderline minor league player. The dude has been nothing but injured. That was definitely insulting. He showed glimpses of his healthy self during the playoffs, and he is certainly an NHL player. The dude hasn't played a full season in 4 years. I'd say that is a pretty reasonable way to combat the idea that Kirby Dach is being all pissy about it. It makes sense in my mind why the Montreal Canadiens would give him a two-way qualifying offer, especially if it fits the timeline of what's going on over here. Generally, NHL players get one-way qualifying offers, but the Canadiens are like, sorry, buddy, like, you haven't played. We're going to give you a two-way. Why would he not accept the qualifying offer? Why would the Habs do that? To save money if they send him down? It would save them a ton of actual money. Likely more than $3 million over an entire season, although he would still carry a $2.775 million cap hit. Yeah, that's what I said. I'm surprised the Montreal Canadiens would do that, really. I'm guessing it's to serve as a little wake-up call to talk about his position with the team. I admit I'm purely speculating the qualifying offer minor league salary is on par with high-end two-way deals. If it's like $2 million, it's not as egregious. So there may be some financial implications there. There may be some, hey, you gotta wake up implications there as well. But at the end of the day, this seems to be the case with Kirby Dach and why he filed for salary arbitration. We'll follow this and see where it goes over the upcoming few days. Dach obviously still needs a contract. Now let's go over onto what Elliotte Friedman spoke about with the Montreal Canadiens on the recent 32 Thoughts podcast, the last 32 Thoughts podcast of this season, and it's one that's filled with a whole bunch of juicy tidbits on Montreal. According to Elliotte, Canadiens management is frustrated that they haven't been able to acquire a young top six forward on the trade market. Now that is pretty interesting. Young top 6 forward, obviously we've seen some names floating around there. Which ones could Friedman be referring to? The Canadiens are willing to overpay if the right player becomes available. For example, they made an offer to the Blue Jackets for Kirill Marchenko, but Columbus has no interest in trading him away. That seems to be evident, right? Like, you see all these conversations on whom it is the Canadiens are targeting and what they're offering. Seems like they are indeed willing to overpay. They haven't been doing that throughout the course of the past few years, but at some point, Kent Hughes is probably going to have to say, yeah, we want to bite the bullet, we want to go for it, we want to be a top-tier team. We already were a top 4 team this previous season, we want to take that next step. If it means sacrificing an LJ Mooney or a Jarobsky or whomever, it seems like the Canadiens are willing to make a move for a big-name, top young player. Management feels that Zach Bolduc has another level to reach. And then Friedman goes out there and talks about some other guys that could fit in. He mentions Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust out of the Pittsburgh Penguins as potential Montreal Canadiens fits. And then he talks about Rasmus Ristolainen, whether or not he could end up in Montreal. Now, I know the Canadiens' need for right-handed defense is dire enough that maybe you're not willing to wait for a David Reinbacher, but is Rasmus Ristolainen really the fit there? I don't know about that. We can talk about these players later in the video, but I want to read some of the replies. Columbus will force themselves to keep Marchenko to their own detriment. Hopefully the price only goes down from here if they keep playing hardball with players that don't want to play there long term. I wonder if the fact Werenski now wants to stay impacts Marchenko's decision. Of course, I hope he still wants to leave Columbus. I would think so. A big part of the reporting on why Marchenko was available hinged on Werenski asking out of Columbus. He's still got a year left, so there's no urgency from CBJ to pull the trigger if they're trying to compete for the playoffs next year. So, we'll see whether or not Marchenko is an available conversation for the Montreal Canadiens a year down the line. Triskos says, I'm meh on both Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust. Ristolainen could be a decent fit, although not perfect either. Another reply says Ristolainen could be a decent stopgap until Reinbacher can play more minutes near the end of the season, but that would leave the question of what happens with Carrier. He would add some grit, which the team does need. This is my obligatory you do not give up on a 21-year-old David Reinbacher reminder to this subreddit. Yeah, it does seem like there are a number of discussions as to whether or not that's appropriate. The Canadiens are fortunate enough to have the luxury of being patient. Don't rush into something stupid. If we can't find the right fit, I trust one of the young guns to take a step. We tend to forget about this. I fully expect all of our young guys to take a step. It is natural, and it's the normal progression here. Now, I want to discredit the idea of Rakell and Rust coming over to Montreal. I just don't think they're young enough to fit the vision that Kent Hughes has for the team. But Rasmus Ristolainen definitely is a guy that, as a stabilizing defenseman, it would make more sense in my brain, but I'm not too high on Ristolainen's overall skill set compared to some of the other talent that's out there. I mean, he had 14 points in 44 games last year, which is actually a decently productive season. One of the more productive seasons he has had since the late 2010s, it seems. Rasmus Ristolainen used to be able to get 40 points all in a row, but this previous campaign, I mean, he was on pace for roughly under 40, but still a lot better than some of the other seasons he has had in Philadelphia. We have seen sort of an uptick in Ristolainen's reputation. He has seemingly gotten a tad better. I question whether or not that's good enough to play on a Stanley Cup contending team, although I will say he was on Philadelphia and he did have 10 playoff games this most recent season with 5 points and 20 penalty minutes. So factorials of 2, you can say, going out there. Either way, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Kirby Dach's salary arbitration going the way it has? And what are your thoughts on Rasmus Ristolainen, Rakell, Rust, some Montreal Canadiens names that Friedman linked to the Habs? We can make more videos about that later on in the week. But for now, thoughts in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.